Hey y'all, it's Donna. Before we get started with today's video, I just want to let you know I've created a Patreon. It's patreon.com/hotforhealth. I'll link that in the description, and that's a monthly deal. I'll also link my PayPal, which if you just want to give like a one-time tip, that's fine too. It really does help creators like me stay afloat and be able to use this time that we carve out to work towards this rather than something that's more financially viable. I call it a tip because Sea Siren Janine has called it that before, and I think that's perfect for what we do. It absolutely is perfect because if you think of it like going out to eat, you don't have to tip your waitress. You can pay for your meal and you can get up and go. It's free, quote unquote. But the person is putting time, energy, and effort into it. So it's nice. Every once in a while, a tip is nice. And being a waitress in the past myself, I do remember that there were always those people that didn't tip, but they would just completely stiff you and they would feel like you didn't deserve it. Or, they had sort of this indignant personality type. And then, of course, there were the people that always over-tipped. And they were always such a blessing because they would help you sort of break even and make up for all of those who didn't. And most people are somewhere in the middle, and that's fine too. And there may be waitresses who, are just doing it because they love to serve people. They love it so much, and they've got so much extra money that, they can carve this time out and do this and not need anything out of it. And that's so great. That's great too. So yeah, just think of it like that. If you want to show your appreciation, give a tip when you can, however much you can. It's greatly appreciated. And it helps us, keep utilizing this time that we have carved out to make these videos in this way. I'm going to link to a couple of other creators in the description as well, if you feel so inclined, again, to show your appreciation. Every once in a while, it doesn't have to be a monthly thing if you don't want it to be. There's other ways to do this. I just want to drive home this point that the time, energy, and effort that these creators put into this work, it's completely up to opinion, whether this is hard work or this is valuable work or whatever the case may be. This is not contingent upon some extremist cult leader's definition of what hard work is. You're giving something, and it's a service that someone is tipping for. So whether you're handing something tangible over to them, or you're just giving them information and skills and ideas and entertainment or whatever that they value enough to feel appreciative enough to want to tip, that's how tipping works. So thank you so much for listening to this 3-minute interlude, and let's get into the video.
Kill me and skin me like I do the animals.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What a sweet person. They must be a compassionate vegan.
Yeah. So that's always fun.
Yeah, I wonder what they would say if they met you. People, they get these ideas in their head that a person who hunts or a person who is a meat eater is causing all this terrible harm to the world, and that they are a good person, and that this person is bad, and they're going to threaten that person, and then somehow or another that's going to make it all better. Or that they're showing you that, they're there to stand up for the animals. And there's a lot of like mentally ill people too. Yeah. There's a lot of that. Yeah. But there's also a lot of people that they don't understand the harm they're doing. They don't understand the harm they're doing just by buying vegetables that grow in a monocrop situation. Oh, okay. How much shit gets poisoned? Yeah. How many animals get ground up when they're using the combines? Do you know what kind of damage it does to just an ecosystem when you run a monocrop operation like most of the food that you buy? Yeah. Human beings cause damage. We cause damage. I mean,
if you're living, you're causing death.
And you got to think you personally are causing a small amount of damage. You personally, for the food that you eat, are causing a small amount of damage. But if you stop and think about LA, 20 million people, and all the corn and all the soybeans and all the almonds you need for 20 million people, that adds up, and it adds up to devastation. It's crazy on wildlife. and wildlife displacement, and just how unnatural it is to have massive fields of any one particular crop.
Yeah.
And all the animals that want to eat that stuff that get wiped out and killed, and poison bugs and poison worms and all these different things that wind up getting
So much
wiped
death.
out.
So much death. And then because I kill a bull elk
Yeah.
and honor every ounce of that meat like it was gold. And, and that's what I always say is people, Americans throw away 40% of their food. Did you know that?
Yeah, I've heard of that.
40%. So part of that's going to be meat. So as a hunter, every ounce of meat is I always say considered like gold.
So the crop death situation is one that vegans love to hide behind because of how vast it is. There are so many moving parts, and so it's hard for, someone with little knowledge to wrap their head all around this. And vegans particularly, not trying to be rude, but they don't have much knowledge on farming, and this is why they end up going that route. They have no knowledge on even raising plants usually, especially not animals. So of course they don't understand to heal this earth, to minimize suffering, to minimize death, to ensure that we get the most nutrition out of what we are growing. We have to utilize smaller forms, and they have to be done, together with plants and animals. You need animals to raise plants, and you need plants to raise animals. I mean, you would think this is common sense, but right. So doing it on these huge monocropped, large scales, it's creating so many complications and so much death, so much suffering. So whether you're eating animals from factory farms or you're eating plants exclusively or you're eating both, you're contributing to this suffering. And Garland Farm, there's no one else who covers the crop death situation better than he does. He lays this out so well because, like I said, there's so many moving parts. And from the synthetic fertilizers and mining from phosphorus and, the pesticides that are sprayed and the animals that are killed from that. Not to mention, speaking of pesticides, the glyphosate that has touched every inch of this earth. And there's no way to raise plants on these large scales without these chemicals. It can't be done. It's hard to do it in a small garden. So, yeah, he talks about, actively shooting these animals that are in the way, running them out of their habitats. And then, of course, the animals that are chopped up when the big equipment comes through come harvest time, which is seemingly the only ones vegans talk about because they like to talk about how they hear it coming and they run away. And as I've spoken about so many times before, one of our first times on the tractor, we hit a fawn, chopped it up into bits. It was so sad and so tragic, and it was only in a small field. The babies don't run away. The baby rabbits, the baby chipmunks, the baby deer, they don't run away. They stay put in one place. But before I get too carried away, I do want to talk more about this glyphosate because I've been thinking a lot about this lately and what will happen in years, decades, generations to come. What kind of earth will be left for our children? Because glyphosate, it persists in the environment. It doesn't disappear ever. And so we keep using more and more and more. And like I said, there hasn't been an inch of this earth that hasn't been affected and touched by this glyphosate. We know it causes cancer. And just with this one chemical, this is just one aspect of the huge monocropping situation, agriculture that we're talking about. Just with glyphosate, what will come of this, generations from now? What will we do? We have to figure out a way to farm, to raise food, to do this without the use of all these harsh chemicals that persist and these harsh fertilizers, these chemicals that are stripping our soil of the life, just raping it. Not to mention the lacking amounts of minerals and vitamins that are in these plants as a result of this. So how do we do this? A regenerative sort of way, like Garland Farms talks about. So obviously, smaller systems is the only answer, because you can't do these large scale systems without the use of harsh chemicals. So we think, so we suspect at this point.
We've known for a long time. 30% of the soil mass, when you're walking on soil, the 30% of the biological carbon is fungal. And the biggest,
Whoa. Say that again. 30%.
30% of soil is fungal mass, living and dead, of healthy soil. So, and this is the biggest repository of carbon in the world.
Wow.
In the ground is related to these fungal networks. So there is about 8.3 to about 10 million species on the planet. Right now, about half of those are fungal species. They outnumber plants up to 8 to 1, 10 to 1 by some estimates. Really nice, interesting metric. And 1 meter of a tree root, for every meter of a tree root, there's a kilometer of mycelium. Now think of that. 3 feet versus 2,200 feet. So that the extensiveness of the mycelial network in our landscapes is vast. And it's I call it Earth's natural internet. These are membranes that are literally sensitive. I think they're sentient. They respond to every footprint that we take on this planet. And as you walk across landscapes, you're breaking wood, and that makes new nutrition available. So the competition of fungi to find that new nutrition is fierce. And so first to the menu wins. So this is something that we are now understanding how essential they are for preserving biodiversity and for the health of the ecosystems as well as our own personal health. Talking about the microbiome, the mycelial landscapes networks, they don't live by themselves. They select a microbiome of bacteria and other organisms that rest upon the mantle. These fungal networks are the foundation of the food web. Well, similarly, we have a microbiome. And it's really interesting that many of the bacterial diseases that infect fungi also infect us. Our best antibiotics against bacteria come from fungi, penicillin being the obvious example. But we have found now doing next-gen sequencing, and this has never been published before, that the mycelial mats growing in the very same wood chips, in our case, that have been fermented, we had a 1,000-fold difference in the relative abundance of genera of bacteria from the very same wood chips, 2 different mushroom species planted on those wood chips, and the microbiomes that were created and selected for by the mycelium were vastly different. This really strongly supports the concept. This is a hypothesis with quickly becoming a theory. I'll explain the difference in a minute. But this really supports the concept that I've long believed and espoused, that these mycelial networks are not just happenstance. They're creating the habitats and the flora and then ultimately the fauna that are resident within the ecosystem to guarantee the plurality and the biodiversity of the ecosystem by creating the plants that grow up, that feed the animals, the insects to create the debris fields, and then feed the mycelium for the benefit of the progeny of the mushrooms that will form thereafter. So these are deterministic organisms that are setting the stage for ecological evolution.
Paul Stamets, a genius. I heard about him years ago. And it was just recently that I started thinking about this in the wider scheme of things and how, this all ties in together, and this whole vegan, large-scale system, big agriculture agenda is just continuously destroying us, and how to fix it. And Paul Stamets, the mushroom guy, these mushrooms you're looking at here, we have this park that we go to, and we call it the mushroom park because there's always so many different mushrooms growing there, so many different types of fungi. And I hope you really listen to what it is he's saying, and bear with me, because this video is trying to kind of encompass a lot of different ideas and tie them together, which is why, again, I suggest you go to Garland Farms channel to look at all the different aspects of crop death. So what Paul here is saying is that 30% of the soil underneath our feet is fungi, and that fungi in a sense is the architects of life. It sort of engineers the whole life cycle, how, and anyone watching this channel understands this, that this life cycle we can't just throw animals out of the equation or throw plants out. It's all tied together. To live requires death. You have to tie it all together. Everything depends on everything. This is how nature works. You have to work with nature in order to be productive in a positive way. So if you're like me and you have a compost pile to grow your garden, it relies on the manure, which gives, the nitrogen and other bacteria and nutrients. And then you have wood chips. And then the fungi breaks it all down. It turns the wood chips into this very fine, moist dirt. And then it puts it all back into the soil of the garden before you plant, the next year's production. And you have your own fertilizer produced by nature, but it requires, everything is dependent upon each other. And if you do this any other way, if you do it with synthetics, you are somehow stripping the earth, whether that's, phosphorus mining or just stripping the soil of the nutrition and the bacteria, and maybe even most importantly, the fungi, which holds and sequesters carbon, apparently. Already knew it absorbed other environmental toxins, but yeah, let's hear more of what he has to say.
We haven't elaborated the code yet to elucidate the concepts that we're trying to articulate. That does not mean that just because you can't prove it's true doesn't mean it hasn't happened.
Right.
So as our vocabulary increases, as our lexicon of language increases, it becomes more robust, then I think we can better describe, test, and prove that these concepts are true. But we're biologically provincial. When we think about how limited we are, we're truly Neanderthals with nuclear weapons. I mean, this is when you look at how important natural ecosystems are. Try to replicate them. They're very, very difficult to replicate due to their complexity. So I think the more that we study nature, most all of us scientists subscribe to the adage that the more we study this subject, the more we realize we didn't know. Mm-hmm. And the hubris of us thinking that these things cannot occur, did not occur, will not occur, really speaks to our provincial attitude towards nature.
The idea that these fungi are creating their environment and almost they're the architects of this environment. They're establishing the landscape for all these different creatures and life forms to live is unbelievably fascinating.
Colony collapse disorder is a threat to worldwide food biosecurity and killing bees. Bees around the world are being decimated.
Say the name of the disorder again.
Colony collapse disorder.
Collapse disorder.
Now, bees are dying off in enormous quantities. Oklahoma lost 85% of its beehives last year. The 2016, 2017, the annual loss of bees report. And Maryland lost 75%. Nebraska, I think, lost 60%. I met a beekeeper in Washington State who lost 75% of his 35,000 hives. Wow. Now, Apis mellifera is the honeybee, and it's factory farmed now. And the almond harvest in California is the biggest market for beekeepers who send their bees to the almond orchards. One bee can pollinate 1,000 flowers in a day. So every flower that bee visits is an almond. So it's one of the most bee-dependent crops in the world. 35% of your food is directly dependent upon bee pollination. The other 65%, much of that is indirectly dependent. But hay, alfalfa, and clover for cows, all of our dairy is dependent upon bee pollination, all of our berries, all of our nuts, coffee is, even cannabis and other non-dependent plants benefit from what's called buzz pollination because the bees then can spread the pollen better through the air. It is now thought by many of the entomologists that I've been dealing with that we could have full colony collapse across the world within 10 years. The cost, it will be astronomical to our society. Prices when food will raise, poverty will increase. You could make the argument that increased poverty leads to terrorism because people are poorer, they're desperate. And so colony collapse now is much worse than most people realize because all the wild bees have now been infected. So 80% of pollination services come from wild bees and 20% comes from managed honeybees. In order to fight the mites, they've been using a toxic insecticide called amitraz. Amitraz is licensed for fighting ticks on cattle. At using cattle strength doses of amitraz off-label, beekeepers have been drenching their hives with amitraz twice per year. Now the mites have built up tolerance, and now they're up to 9 times a year. They're soaking the hives in order to kill the mites, because the mites are injecting these viruses. This is all hands on deck. This is the proverbial shit's going to hit the fan on this. This is extremely important.
So we've heard about the bee complications and the worrisome issues that come with that for, years and years now. But what can be done? As long as we have these monocrop systems, we're going to be putting out pesticides. And this isn't even including the insecticides he speaks about. This is disrupting, the ecosystems at large. It's disrupting the way nature naturally works, the way these systems need to work synergistically with each other. And so the only thing we can do to resolve any of this is to, of course, figure out a way to raise our food, whether we're talking about plants or animals, vegans. Quit getting hung up on one side of this, plants or animals, in a way that works with nature rather than against it. And Paul has many patents that he's came out with, I think about a decade or so ago. Still to this day, he is unable to sell natural pesticides with his fungi, concoctions. And I'll talk more about this, but he still hasn't been approved by the EPA. And he never will be. If Big Ag and these huge conglomerates that are becoming fewer and fewer, that own everything, all aspects of the food system, not just the meat, not just the vegan food, they own it all. And as long as they have a say, which they will because they have all the money, these are the donors, the sponsors, the funders of all of these big YouTube channels, these vegan YouTube channels that spout out nothing but propaganda and moving your hand a little to the left and don't mind. It's super easy. Just go to McDonald's and get the vegan burger. Go to the grocery store and get the vegan options. And that way you're doing your part. You don't have to think any deeper into this. As long as they run all of this, we're not even going to try to utilize fungi in the way that he speaks about.
Have issued, and there was no prior art. Even though we all grew up with the Winnie the Pooh, we knew that bears went into rotted trees to find honey and beehives. No one, apparently until me, made the connection that bees are attracted to the mycelium in rotted logs because of immunological benefit. Now let's go back in time, because this is a very big picture concept here. 12,000 years ago, we invented agriculture. What did we do? We started to deforest. When we started cutting down the trees, we began to dismantle the immunological mycelial nets of nature. Mycelium needs wood to decompose. You take away the wood, mycelium doesn't have a habitat. Because the mycelium is producing these antiviral compounds rotting the wood, the bees were attracted, and because of deforestation now, we're stressing the bees. So there's not only the lack of habitat, deforestation, there's now neonicotinoids, Bayer and Syngenta, that produces neonics, as they're known, a toxic insecticide, sponsored research in Europe because they didn't believe that neonicotinoids harmed the bees. The researchers then finally published, when they got the results that was contrary to the interests of Syngenta and Bayer, that in fact neonicotinoids harm the second and third generations. Now neonicotinoids are now banned in Europe. They are not banned in the United States, so you have drift of these neonicotinoids on their adjacent fields. So you have loss of wood, deforestation, you have neonicotinoids, you have glyphosates that are associated with GMOs because they interfere with the microbiome of the bees and their gut flora, so they can't detoxify. It's called the cytochrome P450 pathway. We all have it breaking down toxins. So there's a confluence of multiple stressors, but the nail in the coffin by far is the deformed wing virus. And we have found now that the extracts of this, 1 drop per 1,000 drops, 1 milliliter in a liter, can reduce the viruses in bees by more than 1,000-fold and double their lifespan. So it's a friggin' home run because it protects food biosecurity around the world at a time that food ecosystems are collapsing. But think of the bigger picture here. For millions of years, we were forest people. We began deforestation when we got into agriculture. We began to dismantle the immunological networks of nature, the mycelium that's resident. The fact that these same mushrooms reduce viruses in bees, pigs, birds, people, speaks to me of a bigger concept, that the mycelium is part of the immunity of the ecosystem. And as we lose the debris fields that the mycelium is dependent upon, we begin to dismantle the immunological health of our environment.
We have synthetic fertilizers destroying the soil, destroying these fungi networks. We have these systems that he claims are crucial to the entire ecosystem, the entire immune system of all life, even in ways that we may not even understand yet. We've got the issues with pesticides, with glyphosate, with, all the insecticides and rodenticides. Thanks to mostly Bayer, which was Monsanto. And we've got the larger population who doesn't care really about how, their food is produced, just so that it gets to them in a convenient and mostly cheap way. And a system that supports this by ensuring that people remain stuck, whether that's physically, mentally, doesn't matter. And then we got the vegan agenda, which claims to want what we are talking about, and yet the tunnel vision keeps them from seeing the whole picture. Which is, it's complicated. It really is. It takes a lot of different perspectives and different studies, different fields of study, it's a whole cycle that has to synergistically come together, just kind of like nature, right? But we do have really smart people who can put their minds together and figure this out. We do have the knowledge. We do have the skills. We do have enough of the understanding to start moving towards a better system. But this system takes a lot more effort. It takes relearning, the way that we have to raise food and doing it in these smaller systems. And it takes both animals and plants. And so you can't just exclusively live off of plants if you're going to do it in a system that's local to you. There's no way. And so that's another reason veganism just completely diverts from that line of thinking altogether, because they can't do that. They have to. They require the monocropping system to eat all of their foods that they need to eat to have a quote-unquote healthy whole foods diet. But let's get back to, the system that takes a lot of effort. It is a better route, and if we slowly get it started and moving towards the end goal, like we heard at the beginning of that podcast with Joe, this hunter was talking about how every part of that animal it's gold. It is utilized. Nothing is wasted. 40% of the groceries people bring in their homes are thrown out and wasted. Nothing is wasted when you have put in this effort, this energy, and this appreciation that you would have when you are, putting in all of this work. You have an abundance of milk. You're trying to figure out all sorts of ways to ferment and save and utilize. None of that would be poured out ever. When you have an abundance of plants that you've grown, you're freezing, you're canning, you're maybe going to the local market. And animals that you raise with your own hands, that you kill with your own hands, or you have someone else do that for you, regardless, when you know what goes into it, when it is so close to home, and you're going to a local butcher, and you can see the cows out on pasture, when it's closer to home and it's not just packaged up in the grocery store, you treat it differently. When it's a wild animal that you kill, you treat it differently. Of course, there would be so much less food waste if more people lived like this. And I get that we can't realistically expect everyone to, and that's fine too. We're talking about slowly transitioning to a better system like this. And you are causing less suffering overall, which is just a bonus in my opinion. That's a bonus. We as humans have to look out for ourselves and our health first, and then the habitats surrounding us and the environments. But the suffering part, that just comes as a bonus for doing the right thing to begin with, for working with nature. More people have got to wake up though, and it ain't veganism. You know, that's just another prop for these big conglomerate, big ag, big industry propaganda tools to keep everyone off the trail of what needs to actually be done. Obviously, without a doubt, the smaller the garden, the crop, the less damage, the less animals that are killed. You can manage it without using chemicals, without using synthetics, without using large equipment, which would be necessary in some cases. But the point is, advocating that veganism is the answer, whether you're talking about minimizing animal suffering and death or healing the environment, it's about as dumb as saying being carnivore is the answer. The world should go carnivore. And actually, that would make more sense. That would be a more rational approach to saying we're causing less death, because you can literally count on one hand how many animals you have to eat per year. Everyone, go carnivore. We will, open up these huge factory farms, forget the plants. The world go carnivore, and we will cause less suffering overall. We'll just eat cows, and then we'll save all the other animals. What is the answer? Well, it's up to the consumer. This is the only way. It's up to the consumer. And so, depending on your financial status and the way you are living, depending on what you are willing to, what effort you're willing to put into this, what you're able to put into this, it may just be choosing to go and start getting your eggs locally, or going and supporting a local farm for your beef. Or it may be that you get a few chickens. You start growing your own little garden instead of getting the plants that you normally get out of the grocery store. You start going to the farmer market and you support a local farmer there. So it's up to the consumer. If you can, do it all that way. Most people can't. But it will take these small steps at a time. As I said before, big ag, these big corporations, these big billionaire establishments with their agendas and their motives and their propaganda and their eugenics, and I could just go on, but they can't maintain the control if people in masses, consumers in large masses, stop buying their products.
This is why I'm so excited in the field of mycology is we have translational science. We have applied mycology. And I think based on what we've discovered, we can make the argument that we should save the old-growth forest as a matter of national defense. Our fungal genomes are essential for our future and present survival. The more we eliminate these landscapes of biodiversity, the more we're losing potential agents that can fight disease. And so this is something that I think we can build a bridge between conservatives and liberals, because Osama bin Laden didn't have access to an old-growth forest. We did, and we do. And I think this is really just indicative of many other things that we can discover.